I'm Mark Fiske, and you're listening to Clear the Air. I'm Mark Fiske with Sonic Spotlight Productions, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Clear the Air. Before we get started, this episode does not include a full origin story of the group called Xband. That's a group that I started and that was at the center of a recent federal trademark dispute. If you'd like to read that story, you can find it at sonicspotlight.com. In this episode, we'll get into some of the details that have not been public until now. So to start, I'm well aware that what I'm about to say will result in the most shares, the most discussion, and the most argument, and some of you might find yourselves wondering what to believe. As one might expect, it's one thing to have a private thought or opinion on the way things are, but it's another thing to make those thoughts public with the intent to deceive or damage a reputation, whether that belongs to an individual or a business. In fact, that's when consequences and damages can come into play. So how will you know what to believe? I submit that when, not if, you don't see me being forced to remove episodes of Clear the Air, you'll know that as stories, the facts as presented were true and do not justify or qualify for that kind of action being taken. Going one step further, if you hear or see anything to the contrary while these episodes remain available, we'd ask that you share those details with us because although financial damages are an annoyance we're prepared to deal with, I consider damage being done to the resources and services we're trying to make available to the student musicians in our area to be completely uncalled for. Xband was a concept that sprung out of what I originally think was the intent of jazz instruction in public schools, which was to provide student musicians with instruction that was timely, relevant, and also presented some vocational opportunities that students could explore outside of school and after graduation. Jazz music started to gain popularity in the early 1920s, and by the 1930s, it was being taught by schools. However, for some reason, many state departments of education and music education associations have been frozen in time ever since, and to my knowledge, no newer music genres have been officially supported by state departments of education or music education associations. For 21 years, I taught in a school in a small town that sits only a handful of miles from 5 other school districts in the county where concern with open enrollment was rightly identified. And as those concerns started to be realized, I watched as, with the exception of maybe 1 year, initiative after initiative failed to reverse those trends, and I started to become really concerned about the opportunities and resources available to my students and other musicians in the area. Xband was formed to try to create a practical connection to music that was missing, to start to try to fill that very large gap in the history of music, and to start to provide my students with a practical experience that they could and hopefully would continue after graduating. Those students were introduced to songs in rock, punk, ska, metal, and alternative genres, and they were included in the process of setting up and using microphones, mixers, amplifiers, and speakers, and in the scheduling of shows and in the creation of marketing materials. There was full intent to eventually explore using turntables and loopers, but for reasons which I'll touch on in a bit, we didn't quite make it that far. The point being that we weren't done with that experiment. Public schools in Ohio offer compensation for job duties that occur outside of the prescribed school day. You'll hear it called extra duty pay or a stipend or supplemental pay. A teacher who coaches football gets it. A teacher who also coaches basketball gets it. A teacher who also coaches baseball gets it. And while I was employed by the school, I initially received separate supplemental pay for marching band and pep band. Opportunities for Xband started to grow, and they played shows first in area sports bars and were eventually selected or invited to play shows in Cleveland and Columbus, and they sold thousands of dollars in tickets and merchandise. With that increased exposure, I sought to protect the concept and the name I had created, and in 2017 I applied for a trademark for the name Xband, which was awarded in 2018. Those expanded opportunities also presented an exponential increase in the amount of time it was costing outside of the school day. And I will tell you that on multiple instances, I pitched, requested, asked for, supported, and was denied supplemental pay for that time. In fact, any time the group played in a metropolitan area, I could count on a 14-hour day where the only person who received extra pay was our bus driver. The trademark was awarded ahead of my final 2 attempts to secure supplemental pay for the duties required. Had either of those attempts been successful, or any of the attempts made before that, the trademark, the graphics, and the curriculum would have undeniably belonged to my school district. But after that final failure to secure supplemental pay, I asserted that the work done on time that was uncompensated by the district on equipment and software that was not owned by the district meant that the name and concept was mine. If that's a version of events you've accepted, I can understand that, but please know that it neglects my repeated and multiple rejected attempts to share the name, concept, and materials with the school district. You heard that right. Xband could have stayed right where it was while I continued to develop and expand it. Here's another thing you're about to hear right. After the superintendent of the day directed the Board of Education to file a federal trademark dispute that he initially estimated would conclude in months, they eventually spent over $63,000 on a 3-year-long trademark dispute that I won, while never agreeing that the work done over 15 years was worth even a single dime in compensation. Board members tried to say things like, why does he think he should get paid more? Which I've always thought was akin to saying football coach needs to coach baseball for the same amount we're already paying just for football. And it was also in complete neglect of the fact that I was paid more for extra time required by marching band and pep band duties. So with that trademark secured, it's my intent to supplement the music educations of students in my area by offering an opportunity for membership in Xband to high-achieving, hard-working 8th grade public school trumpet, trombone, saxophone, and drum set players within a 2-county radius of Crawford County, Ohio. So our service area for that, and most of the other services offered by Sonic Spotlight Productions, includes Crawford, Seneca, Huron, Richland, Morrow, Marion, Wyandotte, Sandusky, Erie, Lorain, Ashland, Knox, Delaware, Union, Hardin, Hancock, and Wood counties. With that group, there'll be one evening rehearsal a month and a short recorded submission required. No charge, I'll get paid when the group plays a show. Student musicians seem to operate under the misconception that as musicians, they're owned by their school music programs. And presenting resources that encourage them to break out of that type of approach to music is as important for their development as musicians and as people as it is for the future of practical live music performers and the industries that rely on those people. Directors of music programs who've accepted a bigger role in contributing to the development of lifelong musicians will have absolutely no problem with that last statement and supporting this opportunity and other ones like it. But the directors who act like they own their student musicians are the ones we should be worried about. I'm going to wrap up this episode of Clear the Air by talking directly to student musicians. Why do you play music? I doubt the reason is because someone is making you do it. And in fact, it's almost always for reasons that can sometimes be too big to explain effectively. And that if your reasons aren't the big ones, I'll argue that you're not doing it for the right reasons. Those big reasons to play music don't have to end once you graduate, and they shouldn't end. That's one of the primary reasons why Sonic Spotlight Productions was formed and why we're planning to see this through. It just seems too important not to. X-Bands have played at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland and at the King of Clubs in Columbus. X-Bands are represented on Spotify and Apple Music, and members have drawn attention from talent scouts and producers. Why shouldn't those opportunities to include you? The only answer to that question is that it can and it should. If you're interested in learning more about Xband or your kid joining Xband, please drop us a quick note at sonicspotlight.com/contact. And thank you again for your support, and we'll see you in the next episode.